As we prepare for the Word of God this morning and what the Lord has to say to us, I want to share with you a story in the Gospels, two stories from the Gospel that both go around a sea storm. They're both familiar stories. One is found in the Gospel of Matthew, the 14th chapter. And I'm reading this from the New King James Version. Beginning at verse 22. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when the evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." And Peter had come down out of the boat. He walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" The second story is found in the Gospel of Mark, the 4th chapter. And again, reading from the New King James Version. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly and said one to another, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" From this last story, but he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? I want to speak this morning from the subject, don't let fear destroy your faith. Don't let fear destroy your faith. Both of these stories are stories of storms, and they both go around the topics, the subjects of fear and faith. And they contrast, because fear can diminish your faith. Fear will extinguish your faith. It's been one of those weeks again. We watch on the news another horrific shooting that occurred in Las Vegas. As last check, there appears to be no apparent motive, no rhyme or reason to why someone out of nowhere can cause such devastation in 10 minutes. How lives can be destroyed and forever changed. There was a time when we would think that as long as I was in the right neighborhoods, as long as I avoided certain neighborhoods, I would be relatively safe from violence, from being shot in the streets. However, we have seen in our society shootings that occurred in schools, shootings that have occurred in theaters while watching a movie, shootings that have occurred in shopping malls, and even shootings that have occurred in churches. And it leaves one with the anxiety that it doesn't matter where you are, anything can happen at any time and anywhere. And that brings an atmosphere of fear. It brings an atmosphere of anxiety. And that's not even counting the other disturbing news that seems to happen all the time, the looming threat of nuclear war with North Korea, that many people feel could happen at literally any time now. When we turn on the news, look for breaking news, we expect to hear bad news. We expect to hear, now what? What's the latest thing that's troubling our world? What's the newest thing that we have to worry about? What's the newest thing that we have to be afraid of? And when we live in times like this, it produces a culture of fear, where fear is an accepted part of our lives. It's not the exception, it's the norm. It's what we've grown accustomed to. And we accept that we live in dangerous times where anything can happen. We see the scammers that capitalize on fear. Some of us may have gotten these phone calls. This is the IRS. There is a warrant out for your arrest. And they call up and they bank on you being afraid. And I've known people that have ended up paying money to similar scams, credit cards that told them, if you don't pay up now, you're going to lose your house. We're going to seize your bank book. And they're driven by fear. And fear motivates them and causes them to an action that could be devastating to them. Why did you do that? Why did you listen to that? Because I was afraid of what could happen. Fear entered humanity from the very beginning. In the Garden of Eden, in the world of perfection, when sin came in, then the Lord called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid. Because I was naked, I hid myself. It's astounding that the voice of God that should have produced comfort, that should have produced joy, now aroused in Adam fear. God's voice scared him. So we live in a time of fear, a culture of fear, where fear plagues our lives. We have fear of the future, fear of being hurt. That affects our relationships and the possibilities of relationships, because I don't want to be hurt again. Fear of death, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of uncertainty. I don't know what's coming next. Fear of the unknown, where I can't understand what's going on now. So there's all of these things that fear can affect. In the stories, parable of the talents, Matthew 25, story of a master with 3 servants, slaves, and he gives them gifts, gives them amounts of money. And we know the story, they had different responses to what their master had given them. And the last one goes and he buries what his master gave him. When his master asked, why did you do this? His answer, I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. His relationship with his master was based on fear. His walk with his master was directed and motivated by fear. We often think that if God would just do miracles, it would produce in us faith. If we could see what some of the old Bible characters saw and experienced. Zacharias was in the temple praying. We read it in Luke chapter 1. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. He's looking at an angel of God, and it produces in him fear. Many times, things that Jesus didn't produce faith, but rather brought out fear in people. One of the most miraculous things that we read about in the Bible is the mountain of transfiguration. Jesus takes some disciples up to a mountain, and he transforms and reveals a part of his glory. Along with that appears Moses and Elijah. What a sight to have behold. What would we have done if we had the privilege to see such a fantastic thing? And their response, while he was speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And suddenly a voice came out of the cloud, saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. Jesus then tells them, as he would tell them time and time again, don't be afraid. There's a strange story in the Gospel of Luke where they come across a man demon-possessed. And he stepped onto the land, and they met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. He's a madman hanging out in the cemeteries, possessed by a legion of demons. He heals the man. It goes on and says, then they went out to see what happened and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. It's bizarre that after that, the whole multitude of the surrounding regions of the Gadarenes asked him, Jesus, to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And he got into the boat and returned. It's bizarre because they were more okay with this man running around demon-possessed than they were with Jesus healing him. That brought more fear than what they started with. You know that I'm from New York City, and there was a time that I lived on Staten Island. And that meant that I took the Staten Island ferry every day to go to school, to go to work. Staten Island ferry is the boat that goes by where, as you can see, the Statue of Liberty. It's a very large boat. They have 30, 40 cars that can go on this boat. One night, I was riding across Staten Island ferry, and there was a storm. And it was a horrific storm. I saw lightning that I'd never seen before. And I was scared out of my wits. And for years, I would refer back to that story. I would tell people, it's horrifying to be in a sea storm. Waves go crazy, lightning everywhere, wind and rain. It's a horrific experience to be caught in a sea storm. And then one day, someone told me, he said, Rev, the New York Harbor is not exactly the open ocean. And I looked, and they were right. The New York Harbor was this little pond that was actually quite far from the open ocean. But fear will distort reality. What scares you may not scare me. The way I experience things will be different from the way someone else would experience things. When they were in one of these storms, it brought a distortion of reality to them. They're in a storm, and they cried out to Jesus, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" They didn't doubt his power. What they doubted was his love. When we go through fearful things, the tendency is to think God has stopped caring about us. Because if God cared so much, why would I be in this kind of a storm? Fear will cause you to doubt. Fear will cause you to doubt God's power and cause you to doubt God's love. Now, when we think about fear, we often think of the horror genre of just being afraid, being scared. But fear can take many different manifestations. I've heard stories of husband and wives driving. Hasn't happened to me, of course. But the husband is driving, and the wife sees something that he doesn't see, or she thinks he doesn't see it. And she yells out, "Watch out, the car." And then I tell her, or the other person tells her, I've seen it. I saw it. And now he's angry. And he's yelling at everybody. Why? Not so much because he's angry, but because he's scared. And his fear was manifested by anger. His fear brought out, expressed itself through anger. We've heard of the stories of people trapped in fires, and they're up high in a life-threatening circumstance. They will die, burned to death in a fire. Firemen come, the rescue comes with the net and yells up, "Jump." And the person is hesitant to jump. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid of the problem, but they're afraid of the solution. They're scared of their trouble. They're frightened by what they're going through, but they're just as frightened from the response. And what happens in a situation like this? They do nothing, because fear can render you immobile. There are a lot of people that have reached stagnation and have not moved on in their life, have not moved on in their faith, because fear has crippled them and prevented them from going forward. Famous verse, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's a famous verse, we all know it. What does it mean? What does this verse mean? It's more than a definition, it's actually more of a description. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. There are many times when I would walk into the kitchen and open the refrigerator looking for something to eat, and I would lament, we have nothing to eat. Joyce would come down and I'm fearfully arguing with her. There's nothing to eat. She throws me out of the kitchen. And minutes later, lo and behold, dinner is on the table. She never left the house, didn't go to the store. But everything that was needed for a meal was already there. I was looking and pondering, how can I illustrate this? First picture that came up. It's a cake. It's a lemon birthday cake. Google just popped it right up. But this is a cake. But this is the substance of a cake. This is everything that you need in order to make the cake. You don't need anything else than what's here. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Everything that you need to produce what you need, you have it in faith. You don't have to source it out. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. When we think about evidence, evidence is proof. Evidence is proof. It substantiates, validates what you're looking for. Those of us who drive, we all have a registration for our car. That's proof of ownership. But who is that proof for? It's really not for you. You don't wake up in the morning, look out and see a car in your driveway and sit there and kind of wonder, whose car is that? I hope you don't anyway. And then when you look at that car, you don't run to your wallet and look for the registration to find satisfaction that you, in fact, are the owner of that car. Why not? Because the registration, the proof of the ownership of the car is not for you. That's for somebody else. When you're pulled over, the first thing they ask, your license, registration, proof of insurance. Not for you. It's for those who would question what you have. So faith is the evidence of things not seen. Now, this is important because it doesn't mean that faith is like a magic wand. You don't get to create your own reality because you have faith. Faith doesn't mean I never have to be sick. It doesn't mean that if I have faith, I'll never have a problem. It doesn't mean if I have faith, I don't have to be broke. And if any of these things come upon me, if I exercise my faith, I can make it all go away. That's not what faith is. When we read through Hebrews and we read about the people that worked in faith, they underwent horrible things. Moses, Noah, they didn't get what they wanted. They got a lot of what they never would have bargained for. Faith doesn't create your reality. It doesn't manipulate reality. Faith allows you to see God's reality. Faith gives you the ability to see what God's will is, what God's intentions are. The second story, Peter and the disciples. Jesus comes walking on the sea. One of the most miraculous events we read about in the New Testament. There in the 14th chapter, Matthew. Now it was the fourth watch of the night. Jesus went to them walking on the sea. When his disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. This miracle didn't arouse faith in them. It caused fear in them. Because God is not always recognizable in a storm. When you are going through the worst times in your life, it's not always easy to see Jesus. It's not always easy to see that God is here, that he is present. He's not always recognizable in the worst of times. Peter walks out on the water, but when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" What he charged Peter with was being afraid and being doubtful. Now, there are many people that say, you've heard this story, that Peter was fine until he took his eyes off Jesus and started looking at the wind and the sea. But Jesus didn't ask him, "Why'd you take your eyes off me?" He said, "Why did you doubt?" The problem was not that he took his eyes off him. The problem was that he doubted. Now, you've heard me say this before. I would charge you that Peter doubted before he even got out of the boat. He didn't doubt when he saw the waves. The waves were already going. He doubted before he got out of the boat. Read it. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid." Right there, it is I. It is I. It is I. The next verse, "Lord, if it is you." That's where the doubt is. But because Peter doubted, that's why he took his eyes off the Lord. That's why he looked at the sea. Because fear will cause you to shift your focus. Fear will cause you to look the other way from God. First comes fear, then fear brings doubt. There was another storm that the Apostle Paul was in. There we read in Acts, 27th chapter. Paul is in a storm, similar situations. Here it says, last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and to whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. Again, challenge him. Don't let fear destroy your faith. The angel tells him, you must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, man, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Not that there wasn't anything to be afraid of, but faith is a choice. Paul says, I choose to believe God. David would echo this sentiment. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust you. Peter's problem was in his language. Lord, if it is you. That was the problem. Questioning. That sounds a whole lot like another time when Jesus was in the wilderness and Satan comes and says, if you be the Son of God, if it's really you, then do this. We see it again at the cross. One of the thieves, if you be the Son of God, if you are who you say you are. Peter messed up by saying, Lord, if it is you. What he should have said was, Lord, because it's you, let me come out on the water. Lord, because it's you, that makes the difference. Because it's you, he was able to say, peace, be still. Peter had walked out on the water because it's you. If we take that attitude, if we take that posture, Lord, because it's you, you can do this for me. Lord, because it's you, you can bring me out. Of course it's him. Of course it was Jesus. How do you think you made it this far? It was Jesus all along. If it wasn't for Jesus, you would have lost it a long time ago. Of course it was Jesus. I would have fell long time back. But because it was Jesus, I'm here praising God today. Not because of me, but because it was Jesus. There were times when I felt like giving up, but because it was Jesus, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. When things come my way and I become afraid and things look scary to me, I think about because he's there, because he'll never leave me, because he'll never forsake me. I'll be able to stand up against everything because he is who he is, because he's God and he never fails, because he loves and never stops. I can go on no matter what comes my way. When fear comes against me, when I feel like giving up, when doubt tries to bring me down, because he lives, I can step out in the storm. Because he is, I can have victory. Because he is, I can have joy. Because he is, I can have peace. Don't let fear destroy your faith.